Welcome back to PHIL 2103, Introduction to Philosophy and Ethics. Now this section of the course is usually one of the most interesting, to say the least, simply because when we get to the topic of sexual ethics, there tends to be, even in the best of us, an individualistic or relativistic mindset that automatically springs up. Whenever we start talking about the bedroom, someone may say, hey, what's right for me is what's right for me in this area. I get to decide what I do with my sexuality. I get to decide what I'm doing with my sexual energies. And so because of that, we always open up this section with a strong advisory. And it's simply this. No, judging by the fact that you are taking a college course right now, you're an adult. And so it is an expectation that I have from you in this portion of the course, as in the others, but especially here, to act like an adult. And what this means is that discussions on certain topics may get heated, and that's okay. It's all right to have a differing of opinions, because that's what philosophy is all about. It's about considering a plurality of options. But what I am not going to allow in this section is for someone to begin attacking someone else personally. Ad hominem, if you remember, is a logical fallacy. But in this course, it's absolutely a misstep, and it can result in action being taken. It is okay to disagree with any position in this section, and I expect you to, in fact. I expect you to engage in a healthy discussion. But, most of all, I ask you to deal with the issues that are presented intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally, possibly even in that order. So as we jump into these topics, let us be mindful of one another. Let us love one another, and let us seek the best for one another, even if that means we disagree, even if that means we present truth in such a way that it steps on what someone else believes, so long as we do not step on that person directly, so long as we do not attack one another. We together are loving enough to engage in discussion and to sharpen one another. As Proverbs says, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So now we're going to begin the sexual ethics section with the topic of abortion. Now this is always a heated topic. It's one where in class I have had many students, some of which who have had abortions, other of which who have very strong opinions about or even against abortion, and sometimes those two ideologies come together and conflict and crash together. So if this is the case, how do we love one another? Well, again, speak softly, but speak truth at all times. So when it comes to the topic of abortion, the first question we have to ask is, when does life begin? That is the ultimate question behind abortion. Is this being, is this tissue, this grouping of cells, a human being that has life and therefore rights, or is it merely a parasite upon another human's body that has no rights and that should, at the person's discretion, be able to be removed at any point in time? Should dependency determine humanity? If you look at your PowerPoint slides, you'll see an amazing picture of a baby in a womb and then an astronaut in space, and the similarities are eerie. Being dependent on one another, does that make us therefore less human, or does it make it more human? So before we can talk about anything in this area, we need to talk about the legal backgrounds on abortion. Now you'll see in your book that it goes through a history of the abortion as legal cases throughout American history. So let's look at these. Now the most common and the most famous is Roe versus Wade, 1973, where the courts actually divided pregnancy into 3 trimesters and held that the state has different interests and responsibilities during each of these 3 trimesters. Now you may or may not have realized that the trimester system that we're so familiar with now, the first trimester, the second trimester, the third trimester, was not introduced until this case. And it was a legal reasoning behind it, to say that the state and possibly even the federal government has some responsibility during each trimester that changes or is different from the next. The next one was Doe versus Bolton. This was also 1973, and the court interpreted the health of the mother to include much more than simply her physical health, but also her psychological and emotional well-being. It's been common practice that if a woman's life was in danger, that the baby may be aborted in the best interests of the mother. Now, Doe versus Bolton included that the psychological and emotional aspects of the mother needed to be taken into account as well. If she was going to be psychologically or emotionally broken from the experience, that may lead to a legal precedent for abortion. The next one was 1977, and it was Planned Parenthood versus Danforth. The court ruled that a woman's right to abortion cannot be limited to the requirement that a spouse or parent, in the case of a minor, should have to grant prior consent. So before 1977, a woman would actually have to get written permission or just verbal permission from her husband in order to carry on an abortion. And of course, minors were responsible to their parents. If the parents said, no, you are keeping this child, then that person was responsible to carry the baby to term. Well, in Planned Parenthood versus Danforth, the courts decided that that could no longer be a binding legal arrangement. The fourth one was 1989, so we're skipping ahead at 12 years, to Webster versus Reproductive Health Services. In this, the courts decided, or reversed the decision previously made, and upheld the denial of public funds for non-therapeutic abortions. That is, anything that was considered just a mother's whim, rather than having some physical or emotional real reason behind it, then the government would not pay or subsidize such abortions. The next one was 1992 in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. In this, they required a 24-hour period before an abortion could be administered, in which time the woman would be given information about the development and probable gestational age of the fetus. However, the husband's right to know were still denied. So a woman would not have to inform or provide informed consent to her husband before making this decision. However, she was required to at least think about it for 24 hours, and they would give her material that showed the probable gestational stage and what the fetus looked like inside of her body, what's going on, whether there was brain activity, heart activity, and etc., etc. And so with that, the woman was required to then go home and think about what she was doing for 24 hours. Now, let's talk about this one, because there is a biblical background that goes into this instance. In my own personal life, when my wife and I got pregnant, I found that my world was changed and flipped upside down. Though my position did not change, I became more strong in what I believed about this topic. You see, when we went in for the 3D and 4D ultrasounds, my son in the womb displayed characteristics that we wouldn't know until years later were a part of a personality. For example, everything that we could kind of see was that wand that was over my wife's belly, and the frequency that was giving off was annoying my son. And he would put his hands up and he would be shielding himself wherever the wand was going. In the basic scenario, he was responding to stimuli. Now, we were ones who also talked to my wife's belly, and when I would talk to my son, my wife would note that she could feel him moving quite a bit more. And one of the most amazing things, and something I could not explain at the time, was that if I were to put my hand on her belly, I would immediately feel my son go up against it. But yet, he would not do this for anyone else, including my wife. When my son was born, we chose to do a natural birth without any drugs or medications. And so my son had nothing clouding his mind or his little body. And within seconds after him being born, when he was placed on my wife's chest, I looked at him and I said, "I love you." And I will never forget that moment where he popped his head up, which I didn't think was even possible for babies with little weak necks like that. He popped his head up and he looked right at me. He knew my voice. He responded to it just as he did in the womb. And so my reaction to this topic, my views on this topic, were forever embedded in me based on what I saw happening inside my wife's stomach. Now, the Bible also speaks to this. The Bible does have something to say about the unborn, which I want you to take a look at. For example, the 6th commandment in Exodus 20, verse 13, says that we are required not to murder. And so in the topic of abortion, we have to discuss, is this murder? When does personhood actually begin? However, from the biblical side of it, we see that God attributes the same characteristics to the unborn in the womb as he does to a person who is already fully formed outside of the womb. There are some verses, some scriptures that I really want you to wrestle with. I'm merely going to list them here, but it would be amazing for you to go back through your Bible and look at these and see what each one has to say. The first one is Exodus 20:13, which we've already mentioned is one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not murder. The next one is Job 3:3, followed by Jeremiah 1:5, Isaiah 41:9, Psalm 139:16, Psalm 51:5, Luke chapter 1 verses 41 through 44, Luke 2:16, and finally Exodus chapter 21 verses 22 through 25. If you read through these scriptures, you'll see things like, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. You'll see things like, before you were even formed in your mother's womb, I knew all of your days. Now this goes back to, what does God know? How does God see our lives? Do we have free will? But when it comes to this specific topic, we have to understand that the Bible clearly says that God knew all of the days of our lives before we were even born. He knew us, who we were going to be as persons, long before we ever exited the womb. And now as technology has progressed and as we've been able to see more and more with these 3D ultrasounds, with these panoramic views of what a baby is seeing, thinking, doing inside of a womb, we've come to understand more and more that they know, they understand more of what's going on than we've ever imagined. And from my own personal experience, those things that we saw in the womb, so many of them that I don't have time to go into on this video, that were going on when he was still inside of my wife's belly, that now that he's out and he's fully considered both legally, spiritually, and all other senses to be a person, those traits, those characteristics, those little nuances that we could see in the womb but didn't fully understand until even now when he's becoming a toddler, when he's starting to develop that personality more outspokenly than before. I hope you'll give some consideration to this issue. Now let's talk on the next video about some other matters that we need to go over in this.